Hello, everybody. Welcome to
Hi.
our last summer fun club of the whole summer. I can't believe it. Everyone is going back to school. Alicia, when do you head back?
So I started my contract today, and my classroom needs to be ready on Monday. And Monday is like our pre-meetings. We have 4 full days of in-service,
Mhm.
and then we start August 26th.
Oh, crazy. So summer is winding down, and our very last fun club of the summer is probably one that you guys have the most questions about, and it is classroom management. And so here with us today, we have Alyssa Campbell. This is
Hello.
Alyssa, and Alyssa is going to provide us with something about classroom management that you probably have never heard before. Alyssa, I got connected with because someone that works with my husband went to a women in business meeting and met Alyssa, and she was like, and she messaged me and she was like, Martina, you've got to meet this girl. And so we connected, and just in the first few minutes of hearing her talk about her purpose in life, I thought, oh my gosh, I've got to connect you with teachers that are using Somos. So I'm so happy that we were able to make this happen.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
So Alyssa, do you want to give us a little bit of background real quick about who you are and what your purpose in life is?
Totally. So I'm Alyssa, and I run Seed and Sow. My master's is in early childhood, and I taught for a while. I was the director of a childcare center for a little while, and had the privilege of working at a school where I got to do research on tiny humans, and we researched with parents, with teachers, and with tiny humans across the U.S. Researched what we created was the SET method, collaborative emotion processing method, and we're going to dive into that today. But I created Seed to be able to spread this far and wide, farther than my little in-person village that I had in Boston at the time. And in doing so, also created Voices of Your Village podcast as a free tool for folks who are trying to raise emotionally intelligent humans to have support outside of their immediate village, and tools that are evidence and research based, and also to hear from other parents in the trenches if all of the podcast episodes are listener content driven. So folks reach out with their questions, and if it's in my wheelhouse, I will cover it. Otherwise, I'm bringing other experts in the field on to interview.
Cool.
Yeah. Awesome. And I mean, your background, it seems, or recently, is really working with parents and families, but you also work with school districts and organizations doing trainings in these methods, because they are not just applicable to parents, as you're saying. The SET method is something that each of us can use in our own lives, personal and professional.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I do both. I do a hot mix of like parent work and teacher support.
Awesome. So what I wanted to start out with is just setting the expectation, what you're not going to get in this classroom management session, which it's kind of funny because Alyssa said classroom management is one of those words that's like kind of like nails on a chalkboard more to you. So what you're not going to get in this classroom management session is procedures. We're not going to talk about, this is how you need to what expectations you need to set for your students, for this is what you have to do when you walk in the room, and these are the expectations, and this is what happens if you don't meet the expectations. We are not going to talk about that today. We do have some suggested resources for some places that you can go to get an idea for what kinds of expectations other teachers have found helpful setting up in their classes. But what we're really going to focus on today is what happens when you have a student, you have an expectation and something that is students are supposed to be doing in your class, and you have a student that doesn't do it. So when rubber meets the road, as it does, hundreds of times every day, what is happening inside of you, and what's happening inside of that student, and how can you process that and further build your connections through that. So, and Alicia, we were saying this is so important. Like we were talking about what questions we see all the time about classroom management and why classroom management is so hard when you switch to comprehension-based teaching. And do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Well, one of the things I was thinking about is that when you leave behind kind of page 32 in the textbook and you're trying to have conversations with kids and get their input, everything can feel really out of control because the kids don't necessarily know how to have conversations yet. It's something that I think I need to teach and model. But it's also, as a teacher, you don't really know how to control it and how in control you need to be. And it can be really uncomfortable because not only are you trying this new way of teaching, but you have to interact with the kids in a whole different way. And all of these problems that maybe teachers have never had before pop up. So after talking with Alyssa just a few minutes before we started, I feel like this is such a neat way to look at our own relationships with the kids and our own emotions, because it all starts with us, right?
100%. So we are going to jump in and what does classroom management do? So what is the purpose behind classroom management in a traditional sense? And if you want to jump in with comments, on our end, Alicia has the magic ability to be able to multitask and look at Facebook and our live platform. I'm not so good at that. So I cannot see your names. I can only see the comment, but feel free to drop in a comment and say, what is the purpose of classroom management? What does that accomplish for you? And Alicia, what would you say? What are some of your big things that, when you think about classroom management, what that takes care of?
Classroom management helps me keep everybody safe. That's the first thing, is that it helps, it makes sure I'm safe both physically and emotionally, but it really makes sure that the kids are safe physically and emotionally. Because when we start talking, I want to make sure that everyone feels like their voice matters and that they have a voice. So having an idea of that's really, to me, the heart of classroom management is emotional safety, but it also allows us to get things done. Like, as you know, I love to do brain breaks. Part of my classroom management routine is showing the kids how we do brain breaks. Nobody gets hurt, everybody has fun, and then we get right back to the content that we're working on.
What, Alyssa, when you're working with Alicia cut out. Alyssa, when you're working with teachers and organizations, when teachers come to you with questions about classroom management, what are they really looking for help with most of the time in a traditional sense?
Yeah, often what we're looking at here is a lot of fear. So fear of lack of control, right? Like, what would happen if I lost control? Both of just like, it's gonna get loud, how do I get them back on track? What if I don't get through this lesson? What does that mean now? What does that mean in the bigger scheme of things? Are they going to be tested on something they don't know? Am I doing my job well enough if they're not getting this information? Fear of, I think a lot of the times in a lot of programs when we're teaching teachers, it's from this like authoritarian place, right? Of like, it's your job to have them come in and follow these certain rules, and so that you can get through these things and keep, as Alicia was saying, everyone safe. And when we are looking now at anxiety, which is higher than it's ever been, both in adults, but also in kids, the biggest thing we're looking at here, anxiety is a fancy word for I'm stuck in fear, is around safety is the biggest one, with the second being health. But safety is a very common fear that we're like, ooh, I have to do all these things because then I'll be safe, my kids will be safe, all that jazz. And in actuality, what we end up often doing is creating a false sense of security for ourselves, like a to-do list of sorts of like, if I do these things, everyone will be safe, in fear of like, if we let go of that, what would happen? The unknown.
That's so interesting. So, and I've never thought about classroom management management that way, but what both of you said ties in together. It gives us security, and in some cases, it's security that we need. Kids need to be physically and emotionally safe, but sometimes it gives you this security that maybe you don't really need, but that it is terrifying for you to feel like you don't have. And so that might be a little bit what we talked about today. Someone said to make sure that students understand and do what teachers expect them to, and so that we can learn effectively in a safe. So again, yeah, the security more from the teacher's perspective than anything else. Someone mentioned that they were having some troubles watching. I don't know. We'll keep an eye on that and see if there's anything we can do. I'm not sure if that's a common problem. But what does standard classroom management not do? And Alyssa, this is really where I'm excited to have you come in. Like what questions are you able to help us with that are not answered by traditional classroom management teaching?
Yeah. So what I want to really do here is look at our own self-awareness. If you are having fear, where's that coming from? So that we can respond instead of react. My whole goal with emotional intelligence and building emotional intelligence in our tiny humans is that they can then eventually respond instead of react. And that starts with us, our ability to know what we're feeling, regulate what we're feeling, so we can respond instead of react. And if we're coming from a place of fear, we're going to react. And I want to respond with intention. I want to respond in a way that can keep everybody truly safe and honor, as you were saying earlier, Alicia, their voice and their ability to have a voice in the classroom, and not just on our terms the way we want it to happen. A huge part of this is in giving kids autonomy to show up as themselves. We also have to trust them. And trust does not go hand in hand with fear. So being able to build our own toolbox so that we can regulate and come from a place of trust and connection with these kiddos, which is way easier said than done.
I think it's huge. I saw a huge difference in myself. I guess it was when Millie was just born. So it was maybe 3 years ago. I saw a therapist for, I don't know, a series of months, because I was having major problems with anxiety, and I had never really dealt with that before. And this was exactly the kind of the thing that the therapist walked me through. And I feel like now I can recognize like when I'm having an emotion. And so I have seen that benefit in my own life. So this is the method you developed, CEP, Collaborative Emotion Processing. Can you walk us through it a little bit?
Absolutely. So what you'll notice is that 1 out of the 5 components of CEP is adult-child interactions. That's like the juicy one that everyone wants to know all the time, right? Like everyone's like, how do I respond to these kids to build their emotional intelligence? And what we also need to dive into are the other 4. We will for sure talk about adult-child interactions, but in order to respond instead of react, you could know in like a calm, rational mind before those kids come into your classroom exactly how you want to respond. And then in the moment, if you can't access that, it doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. So what I want to talk through first are these other 4 components that help us show up ready to respond instead of react.
It kind of reminds me of language acquisition, because you can memorize words and grammar rules all day long, but if you haven't acquired it in the moment of that spontaneous communication, it's going to be completely useless to you. So great.
Yeah, exactly. And what we're looking at here is really moving from the amygdala to the prefrontal cortex, moving from your feelings brain into your rational thinking brain. And we think of this often with kids, but y'all, we're doing it too. It's happening to us too. So the first thing we're talking about here is scientific knowledge, which is exactly this. What's happening in the brain? If you know how like if somebody tells a joke and everyone's laughing, like you're more apt to smile or laugh and kind of join in with that. It's literally mirror neurons. You are mirroring what's happening there. And in the same way, if a kid is yelling in your classroom, internally, you're yelling too. You are also spiking cortisol, and you are going into your amygdala, which is your feelings brain. And our job now is to say like, okay, how do I bring the calm? It is not a child's job to bring the calm for you. It's your job to bring it for them. And so what we're looking at here is like, okay, first I know that this is happening. That is step 1. That's the scientific knowledge part of like recognizing that I'm not calm and I need to take control of that, right? So, oh, you can go back. Oh,
sorry.
Well, I just want to talk through all 5 of these guys.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, you're fine. Self-awareness. Self-awareness is this, right? Where you're then noticing at a 2, at a 3, at a 4, rather than when you're blowing at an 8 or a 9. And then you're just in this, like, I need to assert control right now because I'm so fearful. Being able to notice, like, oh, I heard that kid yell and I'm starting to feel it maybe in my body. Maybe I'm just starting to notice this like rush of cortisol. Being able to notice that earlier and earlier. That's our own self-awareness. The next is bias. Do we have biases around who's allowed to express what when? Do we have biases around certain ages and stages where we're expecting kids to have certain skill sets, whether we've taught them or not? So often what we're hearing, and honestly, it goes younger and younger and younger, where I'll hear from like high school teachers, they should have had this in middle school teachers, they should have gotten this skill in elementary school, right down to like, I'm working with toddlers and toddler teachers are like, well, they should know how to, and it's, well, nobody taught them. Nobody taught them what to do with these big emotions other than saying like, go to this calm corner and feel calm and come back when you're ready. Like no one taught them what else to do with this, right? And so if these kiddos are coming to you, whether you like it or not, if they don't have that skill, this is what you're working with. And you can continue to say like it should be somebody else's job, or we can look at this and address it. But looking at like, what are your biases? What are the things that you are expecting of certain kiddos? And we studies show, again, whether we like it or not, based on gender, we allow kids to feel certain things. And a lot of the times we allow boys to feel anger in a binary system and girls not to. And that with girls, we want them to show up and be polite and kind and respectful. And with boys, we don't want them to feel sad or embarrassed or disappointed, but we will allow them to feel angry. So they learn like what they're allowed to express, right? Mm-hmm. So looking at what are our biases, and Yale and Harvard both have online tests that can help you dive deeper into your own biases and identify those. Some of them you'll know. Some of them are things that are coming from your own cultural context. How were you raised? What were your expectations? What are you bringing to the table? And others are not going to be as like in your face. So learning like what does that look like? Because you're going to have to, again, have that self-awareness around it in order to change anything about it or to even be mindful of this. You'll see that. Yeah, please.
Can I ask a question about this idea of expectations, what the students should be able to do? Because I feel like in a secondary context, a lot of teachers assume that students should be able to sit still and listen, right? So is that an example of this kind of bias that we're bringing?
Totally. That like at a certain age or stage, we're like, all right, you should be able to sit here and listen to this for 45 minutes or whatever it is. And then when they're not, we're like, well, they should be able to. They just need to know that this is my expectation for the classroom, and then they'll know the rule and they'll follow along. Mm-hmm. And no, sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes they're communicating something else, like a sensory need or something like that. But if we have this like tunnel vision, it's really hard to see what the root of that is. The next one, the last one, that is the one that we are the worst at in the US specifically, is self-care. This isn't necessarily like a weekend away or like a night out. This is, are you drinking water throughout the day? Are you moving your body when you need to? Are you eating? Are you sleeping enough? Like, are you showing up ready to just do work and be present to these humans? Or is there something else that you need to be taking care of? Do you have to go to the bathroom? Are you doing that, right? Like just these like really seems like basic things, but so often we're like, oh, I'll do that next period, or I'll get to this after, I'll be able to eat here. And so then you're going through hungry and your system's dysregulated, and it's really hard to respond instead of react when you're dysregulated.
Right, and for me, just already the you bring the calm. Mm-hmm. I remember listening to like a Lisa TerKeurst. It was just like a short little snippet back in the day, and she talked about. She said like you bring the peace, and that was like her mantra. And for a time, and she talked about that same thing that I can't expect my own tiny humans, any of them, to bring the peace, but that I'm the adult, I set the tone. And so when we lived in Alaska, I had that over my my doorpost because in the morning when you wake up and you're running late and you're going crazy, and then like the kids come down and they're crazy, it's because like I have not brought peace, I've brought chaos. And I think so often as teachers, like hashtag no judgment, like teaching is insane. It's crazy. And you have all of these outside things. And so then when you come into the classroom, like you're coming in not intentionally, but you're bringing all of that with you. And so the tone that you're bringing and those mirror neurons that are firing are ones of chaos, not of calm.
Yeah, and there can be so many layers to it. Like you could be bringing on a day-to-day basis, maybe you're like not down with your admin team or things that are being put in place in that context. And now you're teaching in a way that doesn't feel comfortable to you. Or maybe you had a fight with your partner last night and you're taking that to work with you. All this jazz, like that self-awareness and being able to identify for yourself. It doesn't mean those things are going to go away, but you can't regulate until you have the awareness. So you're not going to be able to regulate your emotions until you know that you're having them.
And I have to say that as I've grown as a teacher, one of the things I've realized is that it's so hard to be emotionally present with the kids and keep an eye on their emotional safety, make sure that they're understanding, because so much of what we do in our classrooms is look at them and monitor them for comfort, safety, and understanding. And that is emotionally draining. Like, it's just hard that if I don't take care of myself, if I don't sleep, I'm not a good teacher. And that has been one of my biggest aha moments, is that that's the number one thing I need to focus on if I want to have a solid classroom and solid relationships.
Yeah. And I think a huge one for teachers in particular is being able to say, I don't know the answer, or I need help, right? Like I hear this a lot from the community. I had someone reach out and she was asking for help. She's a mom of two. She was like, I'm a teacher, I should know this. And I was like, oh, so you should have all the answers because you have a master's degree. That's not how the world works. In fact, I think the best humans, the best parents, the best teachers are the ones that say, I need help over here, or I'm maxing out, or I need to run to the bathroom, or whatever. In any way, like asking for help is what you need, like whether it is taking a break for a minute or saying, I need more training on this. I feel like this is an area I need to work on, whatever it is. But that is a part of this self-care as well. Like, what does it look like to show up as your best self? Awesome. Do that.
I think that's one of the reasons that I love our Somos Collab group so much, is that I think sometimes it's easier to ask help from anonymous people.
Strangers on the internet.
Yeah. But hopefully, if the teachers are developing the habit of asking for help in the group, they can find the confidence to carry that into their lives and get help from the resources that are in their own buildings too. I saw there was a question that someone asked about male and female students, and I think we're going to get into each of these a little bit more. So maybe when we get into talking about bias, we can bring that up. And then
and we'll do a Q&A at the end, right?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah. So we're going to jump in and we're going to walk through the phases. So first phase.
Yeah, the first phase, so we have for the adult-child interactions, we worked with neuroscientists and neuropsychologists to learn like what's actually happening in your body to process an emotion, not to stop expressing, not to just push her below the surface and make it so that everyone can hang, but to actually process an emotion. What's actually happening in your body? And from learning this, we developed 5 phases of emotion processing that everybody, adult, child, whatever, is going to go through. And so we can learn to identify where are we, what do we need to build, and where are each of these humans? What are they in right now, and how do I take them through this process? The very first one is to allow ourselves to feel. It sounds easier than it is, right? Like, I know I am so guilty of like, ooh, I'm having a feeling it's uncomfortable. Let me just scroll on Instagram right quick. I can not feel that anymore. That would be great. or even just distracting ourselves or our kiddos out of it, like trying to solve a problem too fast because we don't want them to express anymore. Like, guys, we're going to get to that after X, Y, and Z. Like, we're just solving, we're not letting them feel. So letting them feel, and this is where a lot of trust comes in, because we're often afraid if we let them feel, will other kids feed off of this? Will it get out of control? Is safety an issue here? I had a teacher reach out this spring, and he was like, hey, I have this kiddo who every day in class is getting really frustrated, and he'll like bang his desk, he'll say the F word, like it's spiraling, and I don't know what to do. And he's like, the whole like admin team, everybody was just like, send him down, we'll take care of it. And he was like, it's not taking care of it, right? Like this kid keeps coming back, same thing every day and in every classroom. And I was like, well, as scary as it is, like the first thing is to let him feel it and to not stifle that for your comfort. And so this is phase one, just letting them feel. Phase two?
I just, before we go on, to me, this is so important because emotions are information, right? So when you start feeling an emotion, there's a reason. It's giving you some kind of information, whether about yourself or in the room. And so I think about, there would be students that are in the corner of the room, and I could kind of see them start to talk. And for me, like I start feeling that emotion, and when I ignore it, and I'm just like, I'm just going to keep going and like pretend it's going to go away, or I'm going to maybe move closer to them, but I'm not like stopping to acknowledge that. It's like there's some information that I'm not accessing because I'm not taking that time to stop and feel that emotion.
Totally. Yeah, and to acknowledge it. So phase two is being able to identify what we're feeling. And this is, you're going to build more and more as you go, and like adding to the feelings vocabulary and looking at like root emotions. Like maybe on the surface you're seeing anger, but underneath that's embarrassment. So this kiddo I was just talking about, this middle school student who was swearing and hitting his desk, the teacher was letting him feel and then just saying, man, I don't know what you're feeling, but I want to help you. How can I help you feel calm so that we can solve this together? And they came up with some things, we'll talk more as we go through the phases, but what he ended up being able to do in the end was be able to say, like, I'm feeling really embarrassed. I feel like I'm supposed to know this. It was about a math problem, and I don't know how to do it. And he ended up saying it in private to the teacher 2 months later, right? Like this is a long-term game we're talking about here. But it was monumental for this kid to be able to learn what he was feeling. It started with the teacher saying, hey man, I don't know what you're feeling, but I want to help you. And sometimes for kiddos, they've never even heard these feelings, vocabulary words presented to them. Like, are you feeling embarrassed because of X, Y, and Z? Or I saw this happen and man, that's so disappointing. I know you worked really hard for this and you just got your test back and it was a lower grade than you were anticipating. And I know you worked so hard. Right? Like being able to connect with them. This phase two is where we are empathizing, not sympathizing. This is where we want to connect with kiddos. This is the game changer for the rest of them. When you go to empathize, it doesn't matter if you agree with why they're feeling what they're feeling. What's important is that you connect with the feeling. So if you've ever felt disappointment before, you can connect over disappointment. If you've ever felt fear before, you can connect over it. It doesn't matter if you felt disappointment over the same thing or if you think they should feel it over that thing. What matters is that you connect over the feeling itself. And that's where we're empathizing and connecting with them.
Someone said thoughts on the word kiddo. And I think, Alyssa, you use the word kiddo a lot. And you have spent the bulk of your career working with tiny humans.
Totally. But I also call middle schoolers kiddos. I'm sorry. It's like so habitual.
I do as well, but just so that we do mostly have middle and high school teachers, and so don't let that be a distraction to you. But that is Alyssa's frame of I think where her brain is thinking when she's.
And to be real, they are kids, right? Like they don't have a fully developed prefrontal cortex yet. Like to treat them in the same way. Actually, yesterday I interviewed a middle schooler for my podcast that's going live soon, and was asking him like, what do you wish your middle school teachers knew when you were going into school? And so much of his interview was about how he's a kid too. Like, he's not an adult yet, and he's still learning so many of these things, and he needs help. And I think so often our expectation is that they aren't kids yet. Again, back to the biases of like, you've reached this age or stage, you can sit, you can do this thing. Like, they're still kids. And if you think back to like yourself at 14 versus yourself now, hopefully that's a different person. And
I think about myself at like 23 and I was still a kid.
Totally. And so like, yes, I think that also just because they're kids doesn't mean we don't treat them with respect and kindness and whatever. I think that's the societal shift that we need to make, not thinking that they're not kids, but identifying that kids also deserve our respect and kindness and how we treat them. So phase 3 is it's okay to feel this. This is where like, I know this is on a spectrum of feelings. This is where we're seeing the rise in anxiety, is when we're like, yikes, it's not okay to feel fear because I don't know how to get out of it. And so I'm going to try and create some sort of thing that makes me feel like I'm in control because I'm afraid to keep feeling it. I'm afraid I'll get stuck. This is where it's really powerful when that middle school teacher said, I don't know what you're feeling. How can I help you feel calm? That triggers to your brain, oh, calm is a feeling, that's a choice, right? Like that I can get back to feeling calm. And my goal for kids isn't that they're going to go from like, I'm really angry to I'm happy, right? Like my goal is to bring kids back to calm so they can use their rational thinking brain. Same goal for myself when I'm having a hard feeling. It's not that I'm going to necessarily make everything go away. I just want to figure out how can I feel calm again so that I can think with my rational brain and not my like primal feelings brain.
That's such a great script. So I'm hoping, Alicia, I see you're taking notes, and I think Sam's probably on here, but I'm like, I need to use that script all the time in my life. Like, I don't know what you're feeling, which implies that like, I notice that you're feeling something and it's okay to feel something, but how can I get you back to calm?
Yeah, it's or safety is another one. Like if kids are in a situation where they aren't feeling safe, then I'll say like, "Ooh, it looks like you're not feeling safe. How can I help you feel safe so we can solve this problem together?" And honestly, like these are words my husband and I use with each other. I'm like, "Hey, sister, not sure what's going on over there, but how can I help you feel calm so that we can move through this?" And sometimes I'm like, you know what? I need space. I need you to not be talking to me for the next minute or whatever it is, right? So that brings us into phase 4, which is coping. And this is the most missed and the one that we're doing the most incorrectly across the board. And that's what our research showed us and where we've been like focusing a lot now. There are 2 types of coping. There's coping mechanisms and coping strategies. Coping mechanisms are what we will naturally turn to numb the feelings. It's what we're designed to do to keep ourselves safe. So if we don't teach coping strategies, we will all naturally numb or distract or really just like make ourselves stop feeling because it's so uncomfortable. And we also do this with kiddos a lot, that we will have them stop feeling because it's uncomfortable for us. And we do it with ourselves, right? You can't teach the music you don't know. If you don't know how to guide yourself through these phases, it's going to be real hard to teach somebody else. If you're not comfortable with your own hard feelings and saying like, okay, I'm not going to immediately numb it. So when you tap into coping strategies, and I'll give you examples, but when we tap into coping strategies, you're going to feel the thing for longer. You are going to be in the feeling for a little bit longer. It's going to take longer for your body to process than it is for your body to numb. So it has to be like a decision where you're like, I know it would be easier for me to scroll Instagram. I know.
Hey guys, we're still here. I'm still here. Our whole broadcast just shut down. So I guess we were having some issues. I'm going to wait for Alyssa. Oh, there's Alyssa. There's Alyssa. We're getting them back slowly.
Okay. Hi.
Hi. That was crazy. I don't know what happened. Really.
No, I also kept talking, so I don't know where people stopped hearing me. If people, what's that?
I have where you stopped. You said that with a coping strategy, you're going to be in it. It's going to take longer. And
okay. And so you have to make this conscious choice to say like, I know I could numb it faster, but instead, if I want to actually process this emotion, I'm not going to scroll on Instagram, or I'm not going to distract myself out of this thing by making a to-do list and making myself feel like I'm in control here. And instead, I'm going to tap into a strategy. And so what we're looking at for strategies are things like, I like touch and non-touch. So sometimes it is genuinely that like we need to touch somebody, and this is part of school. Like, what does that look like when a kid like really needs a hug? Like, what are you allowed to do? And I've been working with schools around like literally what are you allowed to do?
Wow.
What does this logistically look like? And it varies so much district to district. There are some places where it's like, yeah, you could give a kid a hug, and there are other places that are like, nope, don't touch your kids. So then it's looking at like, okay, what else can we give them that'll give them that same sensory input that they would get in a hug? Like, are there things that we can have in our classrooms that they can like squeeze into? For the kiddo who was banging his hands on his desk and swearing, what he benefited from was physical movement. So in the same way you might as an adult like go for a run, for him it was like he was walking down the hallway to the gym and just coming right back. It was taking space from it. It was moving. Literally, it moves the cortisol throughout your body. And physical movement's awesome. It could be arts expression. It could be like taking a break to go like draw or write, like journal, get it out in some capacity. And again, I think so many of these things we're like, we don't have time for that in the classroom. But if that kid is going to sit in that classroom the rest of the time with unprocessed emotions, they're not going to take in what you want them to take in anyway. Versus if, yeah.
And they're going to prevent you from helping everybody else. Like if you can't support them, you're not going to be able to support anybody else, because they're going to be basically sucking the air out of the room and sucking your energy.
Yeah.
So
it's
a little time, a little investment now could save your whole year, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's like, as you're saying this, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so hard. Like when I think about classroom management, it's like, just the kids are supposed to be doing, like, if they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, it's fine. And like, this is the consequence. But I mean, what this is saying like the same consequence, like different kids need different things. And so we've got to know our kids, and we've got to work through these things and figure out what they are. But like you said, especially, I mean, not even the second half of the school year, already a few months into the school year, we start seeing all of these questions pop up like, help, my classes are totally out of control. I don't know what's going on. I feel totally stressed out. I want to give up teaching. And so it's like, that's where it leads. So even though this is like the messy stuff, the hard stuff, it's the stuff that's needed.
It also builds so much trust with your kiddos. Mm-hmm. It's insane. And when you have trust, we can go to so many places. Mm-hmm. And Brene Brown's research showed us that everybody needs one human that we can break down to, mm-hmm. whose feelings we don't feel responsible for. Mm-hmm. And you don't have to be that person for every kid, but if you want to be that person for someone, that means saying, I can handle your hard feelings. I'm not afraid of them. And you can break down to me. We can still do it with respect. I'm not going to let you hit me, but I can handle your hard feelings, and I want to help you through them. Normalizing it's okay to feel.
And the flip side of that is feeling okay that you don't have to be that person. Like it's okay if that kid needs to go to someone else to break down.
So you can't be that person for every single person. Right. And so like in the instance of the middle schooler in this classroom, I've been talking about, this teacher couldn't be that person for him and everyone else in the classroom. But he knew this kid disrupts my classroom every single day. And if I can support this kid, it can change my classroom day to day. Mm-hmm. And it sure did. That kid he stopped hitting the desk. He stopped swearing. He was able to say, I feel embarrassed that I don't know this math problem. And he told it to him after class. He didn't say it in front of the rest of the class. But he was like, I feel like I need help on it and I don't know what to do. And then they could move from there. And then this teacher could support him in a whole nother way and at least say like, dude, I know like when these problems are on here and it says like at whatever age you should know this, it does feel like you should know that. And that is embarrassing when you feel like you weren't taught that. And I want to help you. We can build those skills now. It's not too late. being able to empathize and connect there. But it does mean saying like, I'm going to lose what I think is control.
Wow.
And that's scary.
Terrifying.
It is. And for some kiddos, also for coping, one of the things that we see also is that it's not just in the moment, but what are we doing, what we call proactively or like preventatively. So for myself, for example, as an adult, like I work to get enough sleep. I drink enough water throughout the day to help my body feel good. I exercise each day because it helps me feel good. I keep a journal because it helps me feel good. What am I doing that helps regulate my system? Or I know that if I've been sitting at a desk for a certain amount of time without a minute to myself, I need to take a walk for a minute, right? Like that helps keep me regulated. And it's the same for these kiddos. It's like teaching them, maybe it's when they come into your classroom, we're doing something that helps keep them regulated or help them start into a different space. As they're coming in, maybe they're already dysregulated, just helping them not just in the moment, but stay regulated throughout. And this will, in the same way that we differentiate for academics, we should be differentiating for social emotional development. That what I need, my husband and I are perfect examples. He is, if we're in conflict, he goes quiet. He shuts down. He needs like space and time to process. And I just fill that silence with all the things. I'm real good at filling that silence. And really what I need there is like someone to talk through. Like I'm an awesome talk therapy candidate, right? Like talking through things is helpful for me. And for him, it's not. Because we have different systems that process information differently. And so figuring out who is this kid and what's beneficial for him. In the moment where the kid was hitting the desk and swearing, if that teacher tried to talk to that kid in the moment, he wasn't going to take it in. He needed a break to take a walk and come back. And the amount of trust it took for the teacher to say, I'm going to trust you, the kid that we don't trust at all in this school, to walk down and come back was huge. Mm-hmm. And maybe the first time that a teacher's trusted him in that space, right? So like, oh, you gained so much from that. Yeah. Phase 5 is now problem solving. Now we can talk about what we're going to do. This is where, like, if we're talking about academics or if it's like a social thing in the classroom that we're trying to like organize or control, we can't do the academic problem solving or the social problem solving until the emotions have been processed. So if they're still like fuming and fueling, and you're like, okay, let's solve this problem, they literally are in their amygdala. They can't. Mm-hmm. It's not that they're choosing not to, or that you can just like keep going and they'll get there. They mm-hmm. need to get to their prefrontal cortex in order to be able to have it be productive. Those are the 5 phases of emotion processing.
So my question, you know, this is I threw this up here because really this isn't something that we can just talk about in an hour, but mm-hmm. You know, I would love for some of those teachers, if this is resonating with you, to connect with Alyssa. She's got so many different ways that she can support you in learning how to help teachers help students process emotions and learning how to process your own emotions. But one of the big things that I see and that causes I start to feel that like that fear is when I'm in a class and I start to see, like, out of the corner of my eye, side conversation happening. So it's not necessarily a student with like a big, crazy display mm-hmm. of hard emotions, but it's like those little things that are making me start to freak out. Like, what should I be doing in that moment as the teacher when I notice myself starting to feel an emotion that isn't a super like, there's not like a danger thing. It's just, I don't know, more of a control. Like, what did
I think looking at like, what am I really afraid of here? Because it is, I think, often coming from a place of fear. Am I afraid that these kids aren't taking this information in? Am I afraid that I'm not doing my job engaging them, so they're having a side conversation? What am I really afraid of here? Because then we can troubleshoot this. Maybe those kids have just been sitting for so long that they're having a hard time paying attention. Maybe it's going to look like a systems change where you're like, all right, after X number of minutes, we're going to stand up and just like move in some capacity so that they can re-engage and actually re-engage. or that it's going to give them 30 seconds for a conversation with somebody, or that the lesson is going to become a little more interactive in a way where they are either moving or moving their mouth. If you're noticing this as a constant thing, I think our inclination is like, we'll keep putting in rules so that we can keep them quiet listening to me. And it's, again, the emotion is communication. It's all information. And so you're saying like, ooh, I feel like I'm losing control, or I feel like they're not paying attention, etc. And if every single day this continues to happen, we got to tweak the system and say, what else can we do so that we can regain their attention, so that they're taking this information in and we're continuing to be in partnership in this communication. That make sense?
Totally. And I think Alicia was going to say something, but now.
Here I am back. Yay. I think that this is really key, because what we're, especially what you said about, am I losing the kid? Is the like, do they need to move? Do they need something else? Because one of the things that I think it's very easy for us to forget is that we're asking students to sit and listen to a language that they don't understand and comprehend all of it, which is our expectation, and let us know when they don't, and respond to questions all in a language that they don't yet speak. And it is really, really exhausting. Yeah. And I know for me that when I start seeing that behavior, one thing that I ask myself is, have I gone on too long? Is this too hard? What can I do, rather than blame them for not being attentive, which is my gut reaction, right? Mm-hmm. That's the fear, like, oh, I'm doing a bad job, they're not paying attention to me. But rather, what am I doing to make it so that it's hard for them, and how can I make it better?
Yeah. I mean, I would challenge everyone who's tuning in right now. How many of you have given us your full attention without turning to your phone once throughout this, without paying attention to anything else throughout this? How many of you have given just us your full attention with no distraction to anything else? Probably very few. In fact, like, even when I presented a conference with teachers, like, there's going to, I know, be moments where someone might pull out a phone, or someone might step out, or someone might turn and whisper something to their teacher because they just had an idea and they want to share this or whatever. And part of that is my expectation that this is probably going to happen for some folks. And as you were saying, like, did I overload them? Have I gone too far? Did I give them something that now they're shutting down because it feels like too much? So yeah, being able to adjust our expectations there.
That, in our first Summer Somas Fun Club, it was on mindset shifts, and one of them was managing expectations, not behaviors. And I think one expectation that I have had and have kind of had to wrestle with in the past is the idea that, like, I don't want to, like, baby my students. Like, yeah, I know that this is a little bit hard for them, but, like, they should be able to, like, why should I have to give them a brain break every 5 minutes? Not every 5 minutes, but, every so often, when I never had that in my classes and I did just fine. And so adjusting that expectation that just because I survived the system doesn't mean that system was best set up to support the whole person for success.
Or even set up to support you. You may have found adaptive skills that helped you survive, but it could have been easier. You could have maybe taken in more or things like that if you had been regulated. Yeah. And what we know about the sensory systems, there are 8 sensory systems, and it's the key, I think, to learning, because you have to filter this information all day long and process it so that you can be regulated and able to show up. And if kiddos, or any human, we really are looking at, like, this compounds throughout the day. So if you're starting your day a little dysregulated, and then you continue to be more and more dysregulated throughout the day, by, like, 4th period or whatever your school structure is, there's going to be a dysregulated human in your space. And you can either ignore it and power through your lesson, or you can do a regulating activity, as you were referring to as, like, a brain break. I'm sure it's like a sensory break. Help regulate systems. And I think it's huge. We're really looking at, like, every 2 hours we should be doing a sensory break.
I'm more like every 6 minutes, but
Or,
But I want to go back to what you said, Alyssa, if that's okay. You said, I really think that we should be emotionally differentiating. And I think, Martina, if, that expectation, well, it worked for me, it might not have worked for everybody else in your class, right? Like, just because that style of instructional delivery worked, there are probably people who are being left behind. And we know there are kids who are being left behind in our classes.
Yeah,
right.
And we do the same thing with language classes. It's like, I learned language by memorizing grammar rules and vocabulary, but what's the name? It's like when you're the exception. It's like a logical fallacy when you're like, I didn't wear a seatbelt when I was a kid, and I'm fine.
Right.
There's a reason we've adapted and changed.
Yeah. So in the same way that we're shifting our mindset about language acquisition, we need to be shifting our mindsets about this as well, and realizing that just because it worked for us and that we survived the educational system doesn't mean that all of our students are going to be able to, and that it's not best for them.
Surviving shouldn't be the goal. Right? Surviving shouldn't be the goal. That's a baseline. Our goal should be that our kids are thriving and that they are so regulated that they are like hungry for more, and they're saying, what else can I learn? And as an adult, there have been classrooms that I personally, as I've like continued education, all that I'm in, and then I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't wait for this class. Like, I love it. I love to consume this. I want more. And there are classes that I have survived. Yeah. And I think looking at like, what do we want for these kids? And if we want them to thrive, we've got to support their emotional regulation.
Mm-hmm. Come back. There was a question that we held for the Q&A. What was that one?
Well, we have a bunch of questions. So one of them was Mikey's question about an observation that often boy students in a binary system are left behind in language classes, and how can we better serve them? And I definitely have some ideas, but because that was my action research project one summer. But what do you think about that, Alyssa?
Yeah, well, I think first is that, like, from an emotional development standpoint, we allow girls to feel so much more and to express their feelings, and the space and the time to process. If a girl asks for a hug, we're like, that's normal. If a boy asks for a hug, we don't feel like that's normal often societally. And so just looking at like these basics that start so dang young, it is wild. And I, in my work with parents in hetero couples, we see a lot of this where mom is allowed to feel and is comfortable feeling and all that jazz and expressing, and dad is just learning this stuff because he was never allowed to. Mm-hmm. And so really looking at, we can hope for something different, but it won't happen unless we enact change, right? So looking at what are we doing, what are we bringing to the table? This is where we're really looking at our biases. What did we grow up seeing, experiencing? If we grew up with males in our space, what did we notice? What was modeled? And then what are we potentially bringing to our adulthood, whether it's what we want to intentionally be bringing or not? What are we bringing so that we can build the self-awareness around it and kind of create a different narrative here in our regulation, and then ability to allow them to express?
So again, it's coming back to looking at our own biases and creating space to go through this emotional processing, these emotional processing steps for everyone, including ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and being able to go to root emotions for boys beyond anger, right? So we might say like, wow, you look really angry, or you look really frustrated. Are you feeling disappointed? Were you really sad about that thing that happened? Were you feeling embarrassed about this? I saw that you were left out earlier at the cafeteria in the whatever it was, or when we formed groups that you were sitting by yourself for a little bit. Mm-hmm. You know, just like seeing. Just, we all want to be seen, man. And just seeing them and letting them know, like, there's more than anger. And you're allowed to feel it too.
And I think, you know, as we're striving to, for our class to not be about curriculum, but to be about connection, you know, that's a really beautiful thing that we're able to do when we're teaching for acquisition. But it's also scary because, you know, as we're making connections, all of those connections are attached to emotions. And so we're just creating more opportunities for those things to come out. And so having the skills to process them. And I think maybe that's one of the reasons that perhaps with boys, that if, in their whole lives, they haven't really been encouraged to feel emotions, and definitely not taught how to process them. If girls have a little bit more space, that might be one reason that boys are being left behind a little bit. I'm assuming Alicia will pop back in. There we go. This is fun. This is like popcorn live. Sometimes
never knew coming and going.
All right. What else? What other questions?
I have one here that says, let's see. Mildred shared, I had a third grader last year who would bang his head on his desk whenever he didn't get his way or got frustrated for any reason. It was very much an attention-seeking behavior, as he was fine in other situations. I will have him in my class again this year, and I'm not allowed to send students out. What's the best way to handle this behavior?
Yeah. First, I want to reframe attention-seeking to attention requests. Attention seeking often has this like negative connotation that like you're not supposed to seek attention. You're not supposed to ask for what you need. And I want to reframe it and say, if this kid's asking for attention, they need to be seen. And they are doing whatever they know how to do to be seen. So I want to give them other ways to be seen. I would focus right off the bat when we're trying to kind of redirect and build like positive reinforcement. I want to find a 4-to-1 ratio at very minimum, positive to negative things we are highlighting, right? So when that sometimes for those kiddos, you got to look for it. Mm-hmm. It is not in your face, right? And it could be the smallest little thing that like, oh, I saw that you walked around that so you wouldn't bump into her. Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for respecting her space. Also, we become who we think we are. And so if we are talking to this kiddo, I want to use phrases like, I know you're so kind and you wouldn't want to hurt X, Y, and Z, right? Like, I know that you are so kind and you wouldn't want to hurt this person. How can I help you feel calm so we can come up with another way to do it? Mm-hmm. I know that you just like highlighting these positive things and driving that home that that's who they are. Mm-hmm. And then giving them the space. I know you're feeling really frustrated about X, Y, and Z. How can I help you feel calm so we can solve this together? Mm-hmm. Letting them know it's okay to feel frustrated. I see you. I want to help you feel calm so we can solve this together. Mm-hmm. Continuing to reiterate, banging your head on the desk isn't going to get you there, but I want to help you feel calm so we can do this together. And then getting in this habit of them learning they can find their calm in order to solve the problem.
Mm-hmm.
That's beautiful. And I think it's important for language teachers, especially, to know that these are conversations that it's probably best to have in the shared language, because trying to do classroom management in a language that students speak, trying to have emotional conversations in a language that is not shared is really hard. I know for me, this is the place where I use our shared language, which in my context is English, to have these conversations with kids at all ages. Hopefully you do have a shared language. ELL teachers have a different challenge because they don't always have a shared language, but I know that there are tools, there are social stories and picture cues that can really support them if you don't have a shared language with your students. And I'll see if I can find some resources to post about that. But that's a big piece. These aren't conversations to have as a teacher teaching a language. These are conversations to have as a human to human. Am I right about that?
1,000%. If you want to see them and you want them to feel seen, they've got to feel like we are in this together and be connecting with you and not be trying to like process what you're saying outside of that with the added barrier. And if you are an ELL teacher, visual aids all day. We have so many on our website that you can snag, and they're downloadable PDFs. You can laminate those bad boys. We have like coping strategies. I love laminators. Coping strategy boards. We are right now creating feelings flashcards so that you can have a visual aid to connect over this, but also your tone and body language will communicate so much. They will know if you're in it or not.
And that goes back to the recognizing our own emotions around what we're seeing them
And
do.
Mhm.
So
The positive identity over.
let's see.
Can you hear
There's
me?
a lot of comments and there's a lot of questions. A follow-up question to what you just said, let me see if I can find it here, is, so a student who expresses this kind of anger or angst, we've been told as teachers to send them out, but I feel like that might make it worse.
Yeah, it's just going to drive disconnection. What they're going to hear from you is that you aren't a person who can handle my hard stuff. It's not okay for me to have hard feelings here, and that you can't support me through them. And so really what I want to build are the skills for teachers to be able to support kids through this, because so much of it isn't something you're going to get in your degree program. And hello, welcome back.
I kept talking. I'm like, why do you guys keep talking over me?
Sorry.
Because my camera was like cutting out. Yeah.
So yes, I think that the approach of sending a kid out is really our last ditch effort. And what it communicates to the kid is, I can't handle this big emotion.
Okay, it is 2:00. So if we have another quick question or two, I think we can tackle that.
There is one question that I think will really resonate for a lot of people, and that is, I find that admin and parents expect that rigor equals struggle, and that the kids have fun or feel calm, I would add, that it's not rigorous and that it's our job to provide an environment where they struggle and suffer. So how would you respond to that, Alyssa?
Oh yeah, what a societal challenge. Right? Like even as an adult and running my own business, people are like, oh, are you working 1 billion hours? Because that's what success looks like, is when you are grinding. And if you're not, you're probably not successful. And so I think that this is not just for kids, it's a societal thing that we got to take a good, hard look at here. So I agree. I think what we really want for kids is to work smarter, not harder, right? Like you can absorb content in 3 hours or in an hour sometimes, right? Like even me personally, if I'm not regulated, there's sometimes where I can sit down to do the same task on one day and it takes half an hour, and another task that same task on another day takes 3 hours, depending on how regulated I am, right? And so looking at like, what are we doing to help our kids be regulated, both from a sensory perspective and from an emotional development perspective, so that we can get the most out of life, whether it's an academic goal here or really anything under the sun, that like it's easier to process information and use our rational thinking brain when we can be present to it. And in terms of like the response to parents and admin, if you are doing this in your classroom and you have regulated kiddos who are showing up able to learn and ready and present to learn, your actions will speak louder than your words here, and that like your kids' success will shine through and you won't have to convince anyone of this. Even on like a very, on a young scale, I started my research with infants, and I would pass these infants on to the next classroom. And it was about a year in, people thought I was pretty crazy in a lot of the stuff I was doing. And then when I passed my infants, who were then toddlers, on to the next classroom, I had a toddler teacher come over and was like, oh my God, thank you. And I was like, yeah, dude, you're welcome. Set them up. But sometimes like your actions are going to speak louder than your words here. That when that kiddo is learning and growing and thriving in your room because they're able to enter their prefrontal cortex and have that rational thinking brain on, you're not going to have to convince anyone of anything.
I'm going to have one more question and then we're going to call it, and we can keep answering some in the comments. But someone said, should we have these conversations with students during class, or would it be too embarrassing? Oh,
great question. I'm so glad this was brought up. So first of all, during an emotional expression is not a time for law enforcement or delivery of justice. So
say that again.
During an emotional expression is not a time for law enforcement or delivery of justice. Right? Like our job again is just help them feel calm so we can solve this problem. You might later talk about other ways they could handle this or other ways they could express or things like that. But in the moment, telling them it's not okay to hit your desk and say the F word, guess what? It's not going to bring you very far. It's not
I
a
know
time. They know, yeah. And that kid is saying like, man, I feel embarrassed inside and I don't know how to say that word. I don't know what to do with my body so it can feel calm, so I can express this or communicate this in another way. No one ever taught me. And so we are like building this emotion processing. And anytime we're going to highlight something that we think might be embarrassing, I would say it to the kid individually first. When we're seeing a big emotion in a classroom, I would do what's called a come watch, where I'm going to say, hey man, I can tell, like when that teacher was addressing that kid who was hitting the desk, he's going to address this in front of the whole class for two reasons. One, to acknowledge, I see you. And two, to acknowledge it's okay to feel frustrated and to model like, I want to help you. What can you do to help your body feel calm? And then the kids ended up learning when that kiddo felt frustrated that he could take a walk. And then the kids will end up, what happens like down the road from there is that the kids will say like, hey, are you feeling frustrated? Do you want to go take a walk? And they will end up supporting each other through this and just normalizing this whole process.
That's so like, okay, so that just like blew my mind, because I feel like most of the time if I have a kid who's like having a big emotion and I'm trying to help them through it, like I want to give them their privacy and not be embarrassed in front of the whole class. But that kind of feeds into this whole thing, this whole idea that emotions are bad and we should be hiding them. Like we've got to process this quietly on your own. Like you should be embarrassed about it or whatever. So, wow.
Yeah. I need to
collaborative emotion processing method for a reason there.
Yeah.
Because it's collaborative, because sometimes I feel like I will, if I see a student having an emotional something, if I see a student expressing emotion, sometimes I'll get the rest of the class doing something else and check in with them individually. But often that's because I know they're the kid who would rather die than be called out. And I know kids. But sometimes I wonder if it would be better to show like, hey, I support you. I want everyone to see that we're all in this together and we're all here to support you.
And that it's normal to feel what you're feeling.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And especially, I mean, I teach 7th and 8th grade. I teach honors classes, which are generally filled
So
with
many feelings.
women who are prone to bursting into tears at any second for a whole variety of reasons. And often it's because what I perceive is that they feel embarrassed, they feel shame about something. And I don't want to make it worse. But I also want the whole class to know that we are.
Yeah.
So I need to think about how to read those cues differently, maybe.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean that every time we're gonna like keep burying this down, right? Like the kid who isn't comfortable right now expressing their feelings in front of everyone, or doesn't want people to know that they have hard feelings because they've never been taught that it's okay to have hard feelings and that there's a process you can go through. That kiddo probably isn't the kiddo who's banging their fists on the desk saying the F word, right? That kiddo is usually going silent. They're going inward because they don't feel comfortable expressing. And so often what we'll do is I would maybe start and say like, hey, I noticed you're getting a little quiet over here, or I saw that your energy shifted. Are you feeling? And I would label a thing and like, then go from there and be able to emotion coach from there. But if there's a big expression, I want to normalize like, yeah, dude, I get it. I'm here with you. It is really frustrating. How can we help you feel calm? And it is so cool to start to see the kids help each other. We started seeing it in such a young age. We were seeing it in like infants and toddlers, and then in preschools where we had a mixed preschool 3 and 5. And this kiddo who was the biggest like kiddo in the class, he was 5, was expressing a hard emotion. He walked away and like walked toward the corner. And this little 3-year-old came over and was like, "Are you sad?" And the 5-year-old just like nodded. And then they just like separated and went each other like separate ways. But what we were doing at such a young age was saying like, it's okay to feel that, right? Like the 3-year-old gave the 5-year-old permission to do that. And we should be doing this with our older kiddos too. Wow.
I have so many thoughts in my head. I feel
Me
like
too.
it's good. I'm going swimming with my kids, and it's a little bit of a drive. So hopefully they'll fall asleep, and I can really think through some of this. But wishful thinking. But really, I think that if anything, you probably just opened a Pandora's box for a lot of our viewers. And so, to learn more, we don't have any further guest spots open or planned. So really, if you want to connect with Alyssa, please do it on the platforms that she already has set up. On her website, you can reach out to her. There's a contact page. Follow her on Instagram. Your posts are so, I would say, like, sometimes encouraging, but empowering, and always they just always make me think. So definitely follow Alyssa on Instagram, and then your podcast, that I'm assuming that can be listened to wherever podcasts can be listened to.
Yeah, it's in 67 different countries, so you can find it wherever you are in the world. You can tune in, and you can either go to voicesofyourvillage.com if you don't have a podcast app, and you can listen to all of them app-free. There's also then a blog post there for folks who are visual learners, and then wherever you listen to your podcasts. Mm-hmm. And we have like emotion coaching for emotion processing. If you feel like you need a refresh of the 5 phases, things like that are all covered. And then I do presentations. So there's a presentations tab on our website if people want me to come to their school and dive in deeper.
Yeah, and I think for so many schools, as you're thinking about going back in your admins, I mean, you probably already have your training set for now, but as you're thinking about your professional development for this coming school year, if this is something that you think, oh my gosh, my admin would totally love to hear, or even if you think my admin wouldn't love this, but maybe they need to hear it, please do consider connecting with Alyssa and bringing her to your school, because I just kept thinking culture shift, like as you were describing that last piece with students helping each other. I mean, it really is a culture shift. And, for you to be doing it in your own classroom, and making these baby steps and seeing small changes, but what would it look like if a whole school says, we're on board, we're doing this together, and in this place, in this whole building, it's okay to feel, wow, that would be something.
And we'll teach you how to process.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being with us at
Thanks for having me.
Club. And that was the last one.
I know.
So, I mean, we had some ideas when we first lined it out. We have some ideas for some lives that we're going to be doing as the school year moves on. But please do hop back especially if you're new to Somos, but even if you've been using this curriculum for a while. And even if you're not using Somos, you're using other comprehension-based methods. I think that all of our lives from this summer are going to be so helpful to you. A lot of them we've put on YouTube as well, so that if you have colleagues that aren't on Facebook but would benefit, you can find them on our YouTube channel. So happy teaching. Good luck going back to school, everybody. And Alyssa, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. This has been amazing.
Yeah.
All right. Have a great time. Thank you.